Coming up, a meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. Don't go away. Coming up next, the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee meeting.
I find my agenda. Anyone who has a comment on any item that is up before the committee tonight can comment to the committee. When that item is up for discussion, you come to the podium in the center of the room, and you'll have 3 minutes to make your comments. We do ask that everyone here present please speak as directly into a microphone as possible for accurate broadcast and recording purposes. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Walters?
Here.
Murguia? Townsend?
Here.
Burrows?
Here.
McKiernan?
Here. To the best of my knowledge, there were no revisions to the original agenda that was put out by the clerk's office, and so the next item is approval of our standing committee minutes from our meeting of April 9th, 2018.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Those committee minutes are approved as submitted, which takes us to our committee agenda that has 3 items tonight. The first item is an update on our dangerous building list process, and Mr. Tib Laughlin will lead us off on that.
Good evening, Commissioners. We're here tonight to tell you a story about hope and danger, the story of our dangerous building list. I'm sure everyone will recall fondly this next slide, our overarching goals for SOAR. Those goals include making the community safer by removing dangerous structures faster and smarter. We would like to clarify those goals to reflect exactly that, resolving dangerous structures, but that's not all that's on our demo list. The list we have today comes to us as a result of an outdated pre-SOAR process. Like many UG functions, it had not yet been reconciled to the reality of a truly unified city-county government. When we started SOAR, 22 departments told us on a very cold day at the lake that they felt that they were working in isolation practically by themselves to address blight and vacancy. Since that time, we've corrected that. Silos are vanishing from our cultural landscape, and truly integrated teamwork is now how we do business. The question is, what do we do to move forward from those old days? How do we move forward on our dangerous buildings list? First, money, we've done that. Second, teamwork, we've got that in spades. Third is process improvement, and that's what this presentation is about tonight. A brief history of demolition. It was in the hands of code enforcement to solve almost everything to do with housing. Anything to do with property issues was left to codes. They worked largely in a vacuum. Working alone, they had very few options at their disposal. They could try and send things to the tax sale, but that was a crapshoot. You never knew when it would get to the tax sale, if it was being processed for the tax sale, what the outcome was when it went to the tax sale, and God forbid you get an email back telling you the outcome if it actually made it to a sale. Basically, codes spent a lot of time chasing its tail, and when they had no other option, they referred those houses that were out of options to demolition. When you have only one tool and it's a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. Today's modern process looks like this. We have easy communication, we have options, we have teamwork, we have common goals. The process has shifted, and this is the new map that reflects the new reality. Now, we could talk for an hour about this engaging map, or we could break it down. Basically, our demolition list, as we used to call it, includes 2 kinds of buildings. There are the dangerous buildings, the actual fire-damaged buildings, buildings that are a danger to themselves, to someone, to other property, to a right-of-way. And then there are homes that are on there because they are simply out of options. Any of these 2 kinds of houses may have made it to the list either as a referral from another department, from a resident, from a commissioner, or through a very long codes process that's exhausted all the other options. The dangerous buildings are pretty easy to understand. Fire, tornado, everybody look at the middle picture. There may be a little pair of red shoes under there. Those dangerous buildings will continue to get exactly the same loving, tender attention from Erin that she has always striven to provide. They will get fast, courteous service. The more complex buildings are those chronic problems, vacant, unresponsive. They've been referred through one of several processes. They've been a continual problem. They're a combination of problems. We can't sort those problems out nearly as easily, and many of them ended up in demolition out of frustration. We have had the tool for a very long time to ask people to simply donate a house if it becomes a big enough problem and they can't manage it. We've almost never used that tool. That's a relatively simple process. We will be aggressively using that tool on those homes that are not tax sale eligible. And even if they are tax sale eligible, we'll ask them first if they'd like to donate. But if they are tax sale eligible, we will work every one of those up for the next available tax sale. We will give the marketplace an opportunity to vote on the fate of that house. If it's a frustration, it may be that the marketplace can intervene and salvage that house. The new process gives each home that is non-dangerous 2 new bites at the apple, 2 new opportunities for interventions to salvage that home. Now, there are risks to this process. There is a delay while the house goes through the process. Some staff are very concerned that well-meaning buyers at the tax sale may find themselves burdened beyond their financial means and abandon the parcel that they recently purchased at auction. On the other hand, there is the advantage that every non-dangerous structure gets those 2 new bites at the apple and a chance to go from vacant to vibrant that it hasn't had in the past. Now, if it goes to the tax sale, there are the usual outcomes. Now, I have to clarify that due to our legal policy, we do not disclose anything about the history of a structure at the time of the tax sale. But after the sale, we have code staff on hand to make contact with the new buyers and give them a full briefing on the history and status of their new opportunity. We've been doing that for the past year, and buyers report very favorable results. They very much like getting the full briefing on what's going on. We engage with them right out of the gate so they know our expectations, we know their plans, and we communicate. Another thing we hadn't tried doing before. We work with a new owner and we will monitor how they proceed. Whether they're a good neighbor or a bad actor, we'll be there for them every step of the way. Of course, we expect a higher number of these houses than usual are going to end up as no sales. After all, these are houses that have been sitting for some time as a rule. They've had a long history, so they may be less marketable than our existing inventory. Whether by donation or through the tax sale, when they end up at the land bank, they'll get a full assessment, which includes the same factors that were formerly covered in the demolition referral. Now, to be clear, if at that point the assessment says the house is unstable or dangerous, it'll move immediately back to the dangerous buildings list. But if it's not, it will be boarded, secured, and prepped for the open house process for Opportunity Knocks, our rehab program. Our pool of licensed and insured rehabbers will get a chance to tour each house and bid on the project. Chris Slaughter will have more exciting details on the current success of that program following this episode, so stay tuned. If the house sells, we win. To recap, if we find a partner, we win. We have a fully permitted, insured, inspected process for the project and a very short turnaround to take that house from the state it was in to get it back on the tax rolls. It's if the building fails to generate any rehabber interest that we trigger our detailed review. Remember, many of these houses would have gone straight to the old demo list for being mathematically unsound. That is, if you had to pay market rate to have the work done on the house, there's no way you could recover your investment. These properties have been in the market twice now. They failed at the tax sale, they failed at opportunity knocks at an open house. Our top flight review team, volunteers, one and all, eager to review these houses, will then look at those houses that didn't generate interest. Critical structures will get a more targeted effort to re-engage rehabbers. By critical, we mean, is it the first house on its block to be demolished? That first house to go makes a huge difference to the future of that block. That has far more impact than the 8th house or the 12th house or the last house on that block to be knocked down. Is it a highly visible site? Is it historically significant in itself? Are there factors that merit us trying even harder to go back with our rehabbers and say, take another look at this? We'll work a harder deal. We'll find a lower bottom line. We will look at a way to try and salvage those. We will exhaust every option before we refer these back to our out of options list. So in this new process, there are 2 more opportunities for the marketplace and a 3rd opportunity on high-value buildings to intervene and take them back from being a vacant space to a vibrant place. I would like to point out I inadvertently left parks off our list of our review team. Questions?
I certainly, not a question, I'll just make a comment. I certainly appreciate this update on a process that appears to be having more and more success all the time in terms of either getting a timely demolition for a necessary structure, or in the case of Mr. Slaughter's rehab, well, I guess everyone's rehab program, we're up to 16 houses so far this year, or so far in the history of the program, I think. 13? So still, that's 13 more than we would have ever contemplated having done in the past. And so I appreciate this outlining of the process and the fact that it really does break down those silos, and that the success of this process absolutely depends on the working together of so many departments and so many employees from those different departments. Does any other member of the committee have questions? Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too appreciate this presentation. I want to go back to the slide entitled Chronic Vacant Unresponsive Referred, and I like the idea, Mr. Laughlin, of your vacant to vibrant, the donation eligible. So as I understand this, if we have something that's, was it tax sale eligible, or it appears that the owners of record are challenged with upkeep in this, we can go to them and suggest that they donate this property?
We have the capacity to accept donations in the land bank.
Okay.
We have recent historic events have shown us that there are some people who will donate their home just because it's not their home of residence. It's this home that they've inherited or come into by some means, and it is just a tax burden. They don't have the means to keep it up. They just want to get out from under. And that is not a tool we have very often used.
Okay, so since you mentioned quite often it's a burden to them already, I guess in situations, we are not going to require them to handle back taxes, or?
We will obviously first try and collect the back taxes. And if they have no objection, we can put it through the tax sale, in which case it may sell and sell for more than what they owe, in which case they get the overage. So that would be our first recommendation to them, because they stand to profit from that. It's the tax current people who have been struggling to pay their bill, or who are just starting to fall behind and are years away from being tax sale eligible, who are the primary target for a donation situation.
Okay, you just hit the nail on the head. That was the question. What is the threshold? What or who are we looking at as possibly prime
Yes, the prime candidates for this are not tax sale eligible. They're years away from getting to the point where we can put them in the tax sale through the legal process. So, but before their house starts deteriorating, we are tired of waiting until the house is falling down, falling in on itself before we intervene. And many people know years before that point that they've given up on it, that they don't have the resources to maintain it, and would just like to get out from underneath, and they don't have any idea they can do that.
Okay, so the houses that would be most eligible are gonna come upon our radar through codes? They're being always processed through codes? How are we gonna be made aware of this group that might be donation eligible? They're years away, as you said, from tax sale eligibility, but.
Frankly, I suspect that the biggest source of our identifying those homes will be our vacancy registry.
Okay.
Because these are not people's primary residence. This isn't where they live. This is someplace they've been maintaining.
Okay, okay. The other thing I wanted to hear a little bit more about that you mentioned was the impact of the first house in an area to go. Because I'm thinking maybe if we've been calling about something or neighbors been calling about something, they want this house to go. Why is that is that a bad thing?
And they may think they want that house to go, but if that's the first house on their block to go, there's a domino effect. Once we demolish one, that we may be back to demolish a second, a third, a fourth. That starts the slide on that house, on that block. If we can intervene and rehab that house and bring it back up to current standards, we are far better off than we are knocking that house down. If you drive through a neighborhood and every house is there, and then one house has this really big yard, it breaks the continuity. It breaks the feel of that neighborhood, and people realize, whether they consciously or not, that this is no longer an intact neighborhood. So studies and literature have shown that once you start, it's hard to stop. The place to stop is before that first one goes. And our first successful rehab was the first house on its block that would have had to go, and it had a hole in the roof. And the neighbors wanted it to go. It's the first house we treated like inventory. We tarped that hole, we boarded the house, we found a rehabber, and we turned it around, and it's the nicest house on its block now.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? The only request that I would have is, and this kind of came up at our SOAR update, the quarterly update, is that as we move through this process and we figure out what we're going to need in terms of department resources to accomplish all of our objectives in here, just be sure that you alert us as early as possible in the budgeting process so that we can do our best to put resources into place to help with this process, because ultimately it helps our neighborhoods.
And we will do our very best to do that, Commissioner.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Appreciate the work and the presentation. That takes us to item number 2 on our agenda tonight, which are communications about land bank business, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Chris Slaughter.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We have a full agenda for you tonight, so and we will touch on some of the, we do have some donation requests since we've passed some policy changes. So we'll kind of touch on maybe some of the things that were just highlighted in the presentation. So I will say for in your packets for the transfer 2, there were 3 properties listed for habitat. Those were inadvertently put in that section, and they will be presented tonight in the transfer from. So I do apologize for that. Was unable to hit review when this stuff was discussed. So the 3 for Habitat will not be transferred to the land bank. They will be transferred out of the land bank. That'll be the request tonight. So we'll get started. We have 3 transfers to the land bank. 3850 Belle Crossing Drive. It's currently in the city of KCK's name. This was one we touched back in April, Commissioner Townsend, so it's brought back. 829 Everett and 830 Washington Boulevard are currently in the possession of the unified government. So 850 Belle Crossing Drive, we have an application also tonight for the owner at 3860 Belle. The applicant, again, as we mentioned back in April, has agreed to maintain the right-of-way, which is, as you can see, is located through here. Both of the properties are currently zoned agriculture, and the process will be to get both of them combined to agriculture, and then part of the request to the applicant would be that they both have to be agriculture before she can combine them. It's just kind of how everything works. And again, her plans are for livestock, a youth learning program, and to just preserve the natural habitat that's there. And then we have 829 Everett, which is this property to the north, and 830 Washington Boulevard. They're both currently in the Douglas-Sumner neighborhood. This is being assembled into the land bank's name. As you can see, there's various properties. We have multiple properties in Douglas-Sumner. But as for tonight, we're just going to state that it's being assembled for part of the neighborhood quality of life plan. So those are the 3 on the ask tonight to be transferred, or approve the transfer request and have those forwarded to the Board of Trustees for final approval.
Any comments or questions on these 3 properties? If not, is there a motion to move on these 3?
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve these 3 transfers as presented. Is there any comment or further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call. Walters?
Aye.
Townsend?
Aye.
Burrows?
Aye.
McKiernan?
Aye.
Okay, next we have 9 applications, 3 property acquisitions, 6 yard extensions. All applicants are current on their taxes and have no open code violations. One of the properties we just discussed, 3850 Belle Crossing, and 3860 is the property right here. 1728 South 12th Street, which is located here, and the applicant is at 1202 Lawrence. 2912 North 5th Street, it's this property right here, and the applicant owns these 2 properties. I will state again that this is a vacant lot to a vacant lot, and that's why we're doing it as a property acquisition instead of yard extension. Yard extensions, we have 1127 Richmond, and the applicant is here at 1125. 901 Cleveland, and the applicant lives at 913 Cleveland. 2108 North 12th, the applicant at 2106. 1140 Lafayette, the applicant is here at 2101 North 12th. 2406 North 12th with the applicant at 2414. 614 Quindaro, the applicant lives at 612 Quindaro. Again, the request is for those to be approved and forwarded to the board for final approval.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Slaughter on these properties, land bank applications? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to comment on Ms. Olivia Moore's application. Since I guess it was maybe about 2 months ago in the meeting that I had asked for more information, and I talked with Planning and Zoning, Mr. Slaughter's office, and Ms. Moore, and all the questions that I had were answered about the intended purpose, and indeed she filled me in on what she's currently doing to help students and others in the Kansas City, Kansas School District with helping them become familiar with animal husbandry and other things that would benefit the school kids, and hopes to expand that program. So I am endorsing this application, and she has also told me she has the approval or cooperation of neighbors in the area. I had some concern about one in particular. So all that's been taken care of, and wanted to close the loop on the record for Ms. Moore.
And if I could just add, I forgot to mention, the Land Bank Advisory Board also was very supportive, especially CABA. Had some very nice things to say about Ms. Moore and the programs that she's already doing, so they were very supportive of this.
So thank Ms. Moore for her indulgence. So wanted to bring it back earlier, but took a little bit longer than I thought. So thank her for her indulgence with this, and wish her luck. With that, move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve all of these properties as submitted. Any further discussion? Any comments? Roll call, please.
Roll call. Walters?
Aye.
Townsend?
Aye.
Burrows?
Aye.
McKiernan?
Aye.
Okay, next we're going to talk about the transfers from the land bank. And as you can see, we have quite a few. First, we'll talk about 3008, 3012, and 3016 North 30th. It's highlighted right here. These will be transferred, if approved, to Habitat for Humanity of Kansas City. They've been awarded home funds, and their plan is to build 2 single-family houses on the lots. Next, 2901 Lake Avenue. This would go back to Unified Government. It is part of the Mission Cliffs TIF, and really the only reason the land bank had it was to abate taxes back in 2016. We do periodically get a lot of inquiries about this property, but with the ramifications of being in the TIF district, we feel it's better to just put it back in the Unified Government's hands, or at least that's our recommendation. And then the rest are houses, or I'm sorry, vacant lots that are next to our houses that are currently being rehabbed. And just again wanted to point out that if approved, they will not take ownership until they've passed both the city and the land bank final inspections, and then we'll just deed the property and the house to them at the end. So with that, we have 3040 Cessna, and there's the rehab house at 3028. 817 Ohio, we have 2 properties right here at 819 and 823 Ohio Avenue. 3520 Ohio, the address here has lost me, but that's the rehab house. 2942 North 16th Street, the address of the house is 2940. I will point out, later we'll talk about this property here as a finished rehab. 1831 North 29th, and I apologize again, the house here is, the address is escaping me. So those are the requests to transfer property out of the land bank. And if approved, we forward them on to the board for final.
Commissioner Walters.
Could you explain again the 2901 transfer from the land bank to the UG? Why we're transferring out of the land bank?
I feel that eventually this would be a property that we would have to get probably some, I'm not the expert on TIF and TIF-related transactions, and I know everybody in our economic development department is. So my recommendation is if we go ahead and move it into the unified government's name, it's probably more of a natural transition to whatever would happen to it if it ends up being developed, or if it ends up being added to existing parcels in the Mission Cliffs TIF. That's really my recommendation. Why? That's really about as simple as that.
Thank you.
So it gives us a little bit more flexibility or more options in terms of if an opportunity does present itself, the unified government can move faster without it being in the land bank?
Well, you know, most land bank property that a developer would take in a TIF area or development area would eventually be transferred over to probably the unified government as part of that development agreement. Again, I'm not a TIF expert. I don't know how those agreements are put together. If there's language in there that says land bank then, you know, maybe we revisit that. But I ultimately wouldn't have the authority to bring this to you without conferring with our Economic Development Department. And I just thought I'd make the recommendation to move
Who's
it.
going to maintain oversight of this property if it's not under land bank?
It would still be a unified government control property, so if there was any maintenance needs that needed to be met, they would probably go to our Parks and Rec for recommendation to have it mowed or picked up, or it'd be no different than it currently is treated now.
This parcel then would just be part of our routine maintenance.
Absolutely, yeah. This is just a transfer in name only.
I just had one question about the two properties on Ohio. I have no problem with this, but we've got 817 as the rehab address, and then 19 and 23, the next two adjacent lots to the west. And is there anything complicated with the fact that it is two instead of simply the most adjacent lot?
That was just the request of the rehabber. And since this is kind of a new process for us, I just figured I'd present the two and see what kind of comments were.
I'm guessing these are 25-foot fronts on these, because,
They may be a little bit bigger than that.
oh, you're right, they are. Okay, I have no problem with it, I just was curious. So effectively, this is a trial run to see what happens in a situation like this,
Correct.
a beta test.
And as staff, we can look at setting certain parameters. Like you said, maybe we just look at one, but the rehabber's expression was to have both.
Be a great yard. Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. If the developer or the property owner that acquires this, if he wanted to build another home on that property, could that be done?
It definitely has the size to, yeah.
Does it change the plat from 2 to 1?
It's my understanding if when everything was completed and passed, more than likely our GIS department probably would combine that all into one property unless the rehabber requested that they stayed separate. I mean, we could request that it go to one, we could request that they stay two separate parcels. You know, I will say we've never really had much demand or any kind of, you know, ask about building something there. In fact, I think we just got that house out of the December sale, so it's only been in our possession for a short time. However, the two vacant lots have probably been in our possession much longer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? If not, these properties are awaiting a motion.
Move for approval.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve all of these properties as submitted. Any further discussion? Any comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call. Walters?
Aye.
Townsend?
Aye.
Burrows? McKiernan?
Aye.
That'll bring us to donations. And again, based on the policy language we passed a couple months ago, hopefully we'll have some justification in each of the requests based on some of the conditions set forth in the new policy. First one is 1926 North 25th Street. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. The appraised value this year is $27,570. The property is current on its taxes, or I'm sorry, currently only just owes the 2017 taxes. Chuck Brockman in our department has inspected the property, and he has recommended that if we did take possession, that we recommend it for demo. He said it's in pretty rough shape. The requester lives across the street, and she just her main request is she just can no longer take care of the property. This is 6737 Speaker Road. It has an appraised value this year of $14,670. Currently owes about $1,700 in back taxes since 2013. This requester states that he can no longer care for the property. 2614 North Allis Street. Currently appraised at $150,000. The property has over $15,000 in back taxes. I apologize for this last bullet. thought I updated and saved it. But the story behind this is the owner lives in Georgia, and there was another property involved, or I think it was just this property. Made a person-to-person transaction with someone, assumed that they were going to file the deed that would then transfer ownership to that person. Well, that never got filed, so it's still currently in the requester's name. That's why the back taxes. But again, he's an out-of-town owner. He states he's never plans to come back to take care of the property. So again, he just wouldn't be able to take care of it. 641 Parallel Avenue, it's appraised at $880, and it is just this lot here was recently demoed. Property currently does not owe any back taxes. We do, however, own this property, and it is in the rehab program, 639 Parallel. So our request would be, if accepted, that when we would get an offer on the house, that this lot would be made available to them. And then these are the ones in green here, 104, 116, 128 Greeley. There's no back taxes. I've actually been contacted by the requester's power of attorney that just states that this is an elderly gentleman and he just can't take care or maintain the property. So those are the requests to approve and forward to the board for final approval.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Slaughter? Mr. Townsend.
With regard to the 1926 North 25th, that's the one with the house that we saw. Where would this go in terms of the order of demolition? We've got, you know, houses already. You have here.
I think Ms. Downing has left.
I'm just wondering, not only with this, but
fast.
yeah.
I would assume it would go to the dangerous buildings list. Now, where it would fall as far as priority, I just am unable to answer that. But I would imagine it would get pretty quick attention to come down.
Okay, that was my concern when I saw this, and also the cost. But as Mr. Laughlin said, we addressed that with the budget, and I remember the earlier presentation. Let's see. The property of 2614 North Allis. So this gentleman tried to sell this.
Well, he did sell it, but the other party did not file the deed that would have transferred ownership to the new owner. So since the 80s, it pretty much stayed in Mr. Cupney's possession. Thus why we have the, massive amount of back taxes, over $15,000.
So does he still own it? Do we need to get a release from someone else to take this in?
It's my understanding he's the owner. I have the abstract report here. Or actually, there are a couple other interests that we would have to try to rectify. And I did respond by email to him late last week, and I've yet to hear back from him. So that could be something that maybe we get more information on and represent, if you'd like.
I would be more comfortable with that because, when you mentioned that there was an attempt to sell this property, it almost sounded like even though the appropriate filings weren't done, someone else may still have a claim to it or right to a claim, so.
And the other option, again, on anything that would be considered tax sale eligible would be to put it in the tax sale process. It's going to take a little longer. Our donation process, as long as everything checks out, is quicker, but that could also be an option that we could look at too.
Okay. Thank you. Those were the only questions I had on those two properties.
I just have one comment to make, and this all sounds great to me. I have been a proponent in the past of cutting our losses and stopping the bleeding by getting the properties in our hands so that we can hopefully turn them over to productive use. But in some of these cases, we've actually paid twice for these properties. We've paid in terms of revenue not collected, taxes not paid, And in many cases, we have been out maintaining these properties, and although we might give them an assessment, we're also not paying that. So it is frustrating that sometimes we've paid for these properties twice in terms of revenue not realized and money that we have spent to maintain these properties when the owners otherwise don't do it. And I'm glad that only 2 of the properties in this list have back taxes on them, and I'm glad that only 1 of them has any substantial amount at all. So I still do think at this point in time, might be our better bet just to cut our losses on these properties, get them under our control, and turn them over to a better use. Commissioner Townsend.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I thought about that, and when I look at these last 3 properties and their proximity to each other with the aggressive rehab program that we now have and some other tools that weren't available, earlier, that maybe the sooner we can get these in, and that there's some other willing buyer who may show up too, and we can get something more usable with this.
So these 6 donations, no, there's more than 6, these donations are awaiting a motion. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to accept these donations to the land bank with the exception of the parcel number 132180. The donor was company, until such time as we can just clarify if there's anybody else that we may need to get some kind of release from, just to tie that in. Other than that, I would move to accept all the others proposed into the land bank.
Second.
So there's a motion and a second to approve all of the donations to the land bank with the exception of parcel number 132180.
And that is 2614 North Allis.
That is correct. Any further discussion on these items? Any comment on these items? Roll call, please.
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Okay, next we have a special assessment abatement request. If you remember, I have obviously not mastered PowerPoint yet. If you remember last year, we had the example of a property that was out in Piper, and there was special assessments on it for sewer improvement. Well, this is a similar situation that was brought to our attention by the clerk's office. This property has assessments from 2003 to 2012, and they were for storm sewer repair. And part of the discussion we had back last fall was that the Board of Trustees did not have the authority to abate those. It had to be the Board of County Commissioners. And then instead of, do we bring it at one point in the meeting, come back and bring it again, and vice versa, the Board of Commissioners passed a resolution, which is, should be in your packet, Resolution 39-17, that basically gave the Land Bank Board of Trustees the authority to approve those type of abatements. So that's really what we're asking. There's no transfer in or out of the land bank for this, but the ask would be to give us the authority, if approved by the board, to abate the taxes, the special assessments, I'm sorry.
Do we know what the total amount of that?
We have basically, on average, $372.08 per year. And I believe if we're looking at 10 years, so what, about $3,700?
And this is so let me make sure that I understand. This is a property the land bank has acquired.
But we acquired it, basically, it was UG property that had also delinquent taxes on it.
Right.
We went through that process a couple years ago. And then It just was recently discovered by the clerk's office that there was still some old assessments sitting on there.
So you have the capacity in your current land bank role to abate the real estate taxes, but not the special assessment.
I can do a special assessments, except until we pass this resolution, anything that was like a public improvement,
Okay.
then that had to be approved by the Board of County Commissioners.
And this parcel is the one that's outlined here roughly in,
Yeah, it's right away. Again, it's not going to be transferred in or out, but in a way, it's just kind of like cleaning the books
okay.
kind of deal.
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve this special assessment abatement as presented. Any further discussion? Any comments? Roll call, please.
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Burrows.
Yeah.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Okay, now it's time for our rehab update. We are up, so we now currently have 52 contractors in our pool. Our housing inventory has dropped a little bit. We have 23 now in the demo program, 73 are in the rehab. Of those 73, 22 have had the rehab process start, 10 are awaiting to close, and we still are kind of hovering around that 40, 41 number without offers, though we have received a lot of inquiries and we're doing some paperwork on a couple, so we expect that number to go down. We also just were deeded on Friday. We'll have 5 of the 14 houses that we will get from the April tax sale. We'll start evaluating, getting those boarded, secured, inspected. And then we still have the 6 that are in the court process of determining whether they'll stay with the land bank or be transferred back to the owner. So we've, since the program's inception, we have 13 houses that are rehab, which includes 7 completed this year. And we have had 9 houses with the demo completed, including 5 of this year. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. This is what we discussed early on the one map, 2912 North 16th Street. And just as we like to do, some before and afters. There's the kitchen, bathroom update, one of the rooms, and just some information. This property was in tax sale 336, and the bid at the time was about $3,900. This rehab took about almost 7 months. January 1st was appraised at a little bit under $3,600, and don't have a new appraisal on it, but the rehabber has chose to make this their residence here in Wyandotte County, so we're happy with that. And the next one we'll talk about is 4110 Roswell Avenue. And again, difference in the kitchen, bath, one of the rooms there, and some information on that. This was in 3 tax sales before we finally got it. And as you can see, someone was going to have to bid about almost $20,000 on that. So it took 3.5 months. Beginning of the year was appraised a little bit over $13,000. They just had a private appraisal for $130,000, and currently they're renting the property for about $1,000 a month. So that's that, and if you'll give me a second, I'll show you the map again, and we now will have a better way to break down the different categories. I think we were kind of discussed that last month about showing just the completed ones, or so we will. So again, there's kind of, let me zoom out just a little bit because I know we have a couple down south here. So again, the ones that have been completed, those are those there. The ones that we currently have on the demo list, if I can click that, kind of spread out. The total ones in the rehab program. and then the completed demos. You know, just like with our vacant lots, a majority of our houses we're finding is in this, you know, maybe river area to north up to 635, and we have had a couple there. I'll put all of them back on there. So if you compare that to our vacant lot list, it's really comparable. But you know, that's kind of the area of focus right now from a county perspective, from a SOAR perspective. And we'll continue to, you know, keep getting our hands dirty and getting these things improved. To go back to the previous presentation, Commissioner Townsend, you kind of made a comment about saving that first one on the block. And, you know, I guess from a rehab perspective, so many times we're rehabbing one or two of the only ones on the block. You know, take the 16th Street we just talked about. I think on that block, we will hopefully have had 2 rehabbed out of 3. But we've anchored both sides of that block, and I believe the other one is tax sale eligible, so maybe that'll be one that eventually will come into our possession. And, you know, maybe if we can keep searching for that right group or developer that wants to build maybe a couple new houses there, you know, and then maybe we've resurrected that whole entire block. But either way, whether it's through its strategic demo or not demo, or rehabbing or not rehabbing, then, you know, we feel we're having that positive outlook. And not only that neighborhood, but the surrounding neighborhoods and eventually the whole county.
Well, again, thank you for your report, your hard work, and everyone who's supporting that rehab effort. Yeah, I had to ask Mr. Laughlin about that because I remember there were 2 houses very near where I was on the back block. And fingers crossed, yeah, nothing else happened after those 2 went. They needed to go. So I guess it just kind of depends on what your personal experiences have been.
Sure. Sure.
But now with other tools available, demolition doesn't have to be the first and only remedy. So that's good. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I love this map and all those dots. Certainly we'd like rehabs, but all those dots represent improvements in their respective neighborhoods, and that's what we want to see. Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
For anyone who was here regarding a land bank transaction, all of those were approved as submitted with the exception of that one vacant lot that was owned by someone who I probably guess is not here with us tonight. So all of the rest were approved as submitted. There is no further business before this committee. This meeting is adjourned. We'll allow Board Member Bryant to make his way up to the table, and we'll start our next committee meeting in just a couple of minutes.
Order the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee. I will now call the meeting to order. We want to welcome everyone to this meeting. Public comment is welcome. Anyone wishing to speak on any item on the Standing Committee agenda may do so when the item is up for discussion. You will have up to 3 minutes to state your comments. Please come forward to the microphone. You will be recognized. For accurate recording purposes, we ask all present to speak directly into a microphone. So would the clerk please call roll?
Roll call. Bryant?
Here.
Walters?
Here.
Murguia? Townsend?
Here.
McKiernan?
Here.
Burrows?
Here. Next, we have minutes from our April 9th meeting.
Move to approve as submitted.
Second.
Motion been made, seconded to approve. Opposed? Seeing none, minutes are approved. On our agenda tonight, we have 3 items, all of which are for information only. Item number 1 will be the first quarter 2018 investment report. We have Kathleen Von Atchen, our CFO, is here to speak, to present for the presentation. So the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you, Commissioner. And we present our financial report for our investment portfolio quarterly. So this is for the period Thank you. This is for the period January through March. And so, as you know, our portfolio typically grows in the first part of the year because half of the property taxes are collected at the beginning of the year. So this year, as of March 31st, our portfolio totals $255 million. We're earning roughly 1.62% on a weighted average basis, and that's slightly up from the prior quarter, and that is because of the rate increase that was put in place by the Fed. So the rates are increasing. Our investment portfolio isn't necessarily increasing at the same relative rate that the Feds are increasing rates because we're holding investments that we purchased prior to the rate increase, so the amount that we're earning is a little bit suppressed. But, you know, over time, we'll catch up with the Feds. So overall, you can see the graph here below. You'll see that most of our investments, or 58% of them, are in short-term investments because we need to keep our cash liquid in order to pay bills, and much of our cash is dedicated for capital projects, which are ongoing. And another interesting item is that 59 or 60% of our portfolio is with certificates of deposit, which are very safe, CDs with banks in our local area. And so that's the summary of our portfolio in general. The next page of our investment portfolio kind of details in how we've been doing over time and whether we're in compliance with our investment policy, which is annually adopted and reviewed in the fall. And so as you can see here, the portfolio the size of the portfolio has been growing since 2015. And so it's slightly larger. As you can see, each December is a kind of a peak, and then it drops down. So we're peaking here. One interesting item is that the T-bill rate has been steadily increasing. That's that orange bar. And so as you can see, the orange bar is higher than our portfolio, which is the green bar. And that is due to the rate increases that the Feds have been putting in place. We are out of compliance very slightly in one area, and that's the limit on a single issuer at the moment. At the moment, it's Capital Federal Bank. They're holding 31%, and the investment policy says 30%. And part of that has to do with a little bit of the timing. At the time we purchase CDs or do investment trades, that bank was below the margin, but then we collected more or spent some, and so the margin went up a little. So it's a little bit of a moving target. We're still trying to keep it down below the threshold. So the third page here is a listing of the people or the banks from which we have purchased our CDs, and also the security. So as you can see, the percentages here, here's the limits, and then this is the percentage of the investments that we hold with these banks. And then we also have a couple of federal instrumentalities, Freddie Mac, Federal Home Loan Bank. So here's the distribution of the CDs amongst the various banks. And we are trying to diversify our CD portfolio amongst the various banks. So little by little, we're working on that. And then this last slide is the last page of the investment portfolio report. Shows a listing of all of the transactions that occurred that we did during the quarter. As you know, here's the change in our cash position. We collected $15 million more in cash, and then we made purchases of $40 million, and then $7 million in prior investments matured. So, any questions?
Any questions for the committee? You have Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you. Looking at, I think, the previous slide, right there. I'm looking at, say, Liberty Bank, for an example. How do we go to these banks and inquire about the amount of participation they may want? Do they tell us? Do we solicit them? How does that work?
Well, it's governed by federal statute, or state statute, but it's also the same statutes are embedded in our policy, investment policy. So, for example, when these $40 million were purchased, we sent out to all the participating banks in the local area, or the banks that are actually qualified on our list, which Liberty is one, and we said, here, we've got these investments that we'd like to have you bid on. We're looking for this rate, which is, the rate has to match what the T-bill rate or for that maturity that we're looking for, with the standard rate, the market rate. And then they have a few days to come back and give us their bids, and then whichever bank has the highest interest rate wins the bid. So, and of course we have to disqualify those banks that, for example, are hitting their 30% limit. Mm-hmm. So previously the threshold was around 60%, and we dropped it to 30 in order to allow for these other smaller banks to have a shot. It's difficult for those smaller banks to meet those interest rate thresholds because of their own internal policies. So, but we're doing what we can to increase the participation of these smaller banks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Kathleen, I have one question just for verification. It's my understanding we have $255,327,900 in savings, in CDs, and in cash.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no other questions? Item number 2.
Good evening, Commissioners. Debbie Johnsher. I'm going to start the first quarter budget to actual financial report. I'm going to cover the revenues, and I'm going to turn it over to Reginald Lindsay, our budget director, and he's going to cover the expenditures. So and all of this, I will say that all the tables that we have in the slide are included in your first quarter report. This first one is a report on the Consolidated General Fund, and I just want to remind you that that includes the 3 funds, the City General Fund, the County General Fund, as well as the Parks and Rec Fund. However, the next couple slides, we're mainly going to concentrate on the revenues and expenses for the City and County General Fund. But this fund does include all. This is just a comparison of first quarter 2018 compared with fiscal year 2017. And as you can see on the revenue side, in 2017, For the first quarter, we had taken in approximately $62 million. For fiscal year 2018, we're at almost $70 million. Most of that increase has occurred in the tax revenue category. On the expenditure side, for 2018, we're a little bit higher than we were in 2017. We're at $51 million, whereas in 2017, we were at about $48 million. And Reginald will have additional information on the expenditures. So for fiscal year 2018, our ending fund balance is for the first quarter is currently at $45.6 million. This next slide up here in the left-hand corner shows the budget to actual revenues for the city general fund. As you can see, property tax is at 56.4% of the total budget for the year. And as Kathleen had said, we received the first half of the property tax payments, and that was distributed in January, and that accounts for a large portion of the property tax. The next largest distribution will be the distribution in June for the second half property taxes. So you'll see that amount come in the second quarter report. Sales tax is at 19%, and other taxes are at 27%. I will just note the other tax category includes the BPU pilot, motor vehicle taxes, casino tax revenue, franchise taxes, as well as delinquent taxes. So overall, the city general fund for the first quarter is at 27.5%. We've received 27.5% of our total budget for the year. This graph here just shows the same information, comparison from 2017 to 2018 by category. The dotted line here represents where we would be at 25%. If everything was on an equal term, we would be at 25%. The next slide shows the same information for the county general fund. As you can see, again, property tax is at about 56.5%. Sales tax is at 23.8%, and other tax is at 33%. On the county general fund side, the other tax revenue includes the casino tax, motor vehicle revenues, as well as delinquent taxes. So in total, the county general fund is currently at 44.6% of its total budget for revenues. And once again, this graph down here just shows all the revenues by category, comparing them from first quarter 2018 to first quarter 2017.
How do these percentages compare to last year in reference to the percentage of the budget? Because we've seen an increase in property valuations, and I'm sure we've seen an increase in motor vehicle purchases. So I'm just curious, are we seeing positive increases in these percentages and reductions where we need to have them? Are they pushing each other around a little bit? They're not as stable as they have been in the past, are they?
I don't have the percentages for 2017 at this time, but I do know, I can say that for the sales tax and other tax category, both of those were up for the first quarter of 2018 as compared with 2017. The majority of that increase from 2017 to 2018 is in those two categories. Property tax was down a little bit. For 2018, we did have a $2 million decrease. However, that was offset somewhat with the valuation increase, but the overall total was down. And that graph is there is a graph that shows a comparison for each one of those categories from 2017 to 2018. But it doesn't give the percentages.
Right, that's what I was looking at. And maybe this is a question that maybe it's one I can put on pause until I have a chance to really talk to Kathleen about it in reference to those dollars that are setting aside in increased valuations. I'd like to know if the increase in valuations, the percentages that continue to go up on the 2018 property tax, what is the industry standard for a city of the first class and about of our population in reference to property tax versus sales tax in operating budgets? And maybe that'd be something we can put together and work on to see how we can find a way to put a stable, accurate number that doesn't fluctuate by large percentages over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, we can come up with that. So what I understand you're asking is, you know, relatively speaking, do we fund the general fund with 30% sales tax and 30% property tax, or what is that mix or ratio in order to keep diversified? Is that what you're kind of saying, or?
Right, well, it's property tax is always one of those taxes that people are concerned about and raise a little bit of concern. The question I have, are we funding government more on property tax? Should we be funding government more on our sales tax? And that drives economic growth. It gives the commission a chance to really set direction on what we need to do as far as how we grow our revenue.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to find out is, our population size is growing, so our housing stock must be increasing. And so my concern, or my question would be, if we have a city of the first class, pretty reflective of Wyandotte County, whether it be in Iowa or Minneapolis or wherever it may be, if we can find out what are they using in as far as funding their budget? Is it all on property tax? Is it all on sales tax?
Yeah.
Other revenue streams do they have that we may want to look at in being more efficient with how we set our budget?
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that. Happy to.
If there's no other questions on the revenue, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Reginald Lindsay.
Not so much a question as a comment, and I brought it up when we were talking about the end of year, and I'll remind you guys again. In 2017, you saw the bump in other because of the 4% rate increase from the BPU, which went to the bottom line on the pilot. Well, actually, there was it was a two-year rate increase plan, so there was an additional 4% on electric that went into effect January 1st, 2018. So now there's been an 8% increase in the funding of the pilot fee. So once again, I will ask that take that in consideration when you're setting the pilot rate for your next budget, to maybe bring it down so that the revenue stays equivalent, but from what you had in the past, but the rate itself will actually diminish a little bit. So.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
Current slide illustrates the city general fund expenditures. We have two different views. One view shows the budget to actuals for 2018. The view at the bottom shows actuals over each year compared to 2017 and 2018. And we can see in the first chart there at the top, personnel is trending at around 24%. We should be around 25%, just like we were with the revenues. So we're pretty close here at 24%. And services, we're at 23%. Supplies at 19%, and grants and claims at 7.4%. So we have that goes on in services is that a lot of departments encumber their budgets because they know they have contracts and they know what they're going to be purchasing for, so they encumber the funds. And the funds are already spoken for. They haven't spent it, but it makes it more efficient for them to do their purchasing. And then in supplies, where you have 19%, this is where commodities is paid from. We have natural gas that's paid from here, also fuel, also the jail expense that the police pay to the county. Supplies, the fuel has been up this year, and then also we had a longer winter for natural gas, so that's why we're a little bit over the 25% there. On the next slide, on the county general fund, I have the same view here where we can see the budget compared to 2018 and how it compares to the actuals. And then in the bottom chart compares year-over-year actuals from 2017 to 2018. And again, we're comparing the different categories, the personnel category, the service category, and the suppliers category. In personnel category, we include things like salaries, also workers' comp, also benefits are included in there. We can see here that the personnel is at 25%, and then we can see our services are at 45%. Looks like departments hadn't encumbered a lot of money here yet, but some of the things paid on the county side includes the inmate housing, also inmate medical contracts are paid from here. And then also from supplies, we still have things like fuel and natural gas that are paid from here. And we also have inmate food that's also paid from here. So the county general fund is trending above the 25% that it should be at. And actually it's, in 2018, it's spent a little bit more money, about $5 million more year to date. So, any questions on either the city or the county general fund expenditures?
Can you explain why the services are double? From what last year, the 2018 actual from 2017 actual?
It could be a timing of the expenditures as far as when the department's done their encumbrances. So right here, the services, inmate housing is done out of here with the sheriff's department and also inmate medical. So it's probably a good chance that the funding had been encumbered at this point in time last year.
Any other questions by committee? Seeing none?
All right. And the next two slides are illustration of revenues and expenditures side by side for the tax levy funds, where you can kind of see a summary of all the funds and how their comparisons are percentage-wise. So the view that Debbie and I talked about, we talked about the city general fund, the county general fund. So this gives a view of the other smaller funds like aging, development, disability, elections, the health department, and mental health. And on one side, we have the revenues, and on the other side, we have the expenditures. And the next slide talks about all the other funds that aren't tax levy ones. So we have some of the enterprise funds in here. We also have some of the special tax revenue funds. We have the dedicated sales tax here, the court trustees fund, our alcohol fund, some of our enterprise funds, the sewer system, the stormwater, and our Sunflower Hills Golf Course. And again, we can compare in here. Revenues are on this side, and then we have expenditures here. Any questions on any of these funds? So we have these funds here. They're a combination of the city and the county mixed together. Some of them are county-only funds, and some of them are only city funds. So how we have it broken out here, we have all the tax levy funds for the city and the county. And then here we have just other funds that are either special tax funds or enterprise funds that are here. And they can either have a county or a city function.
So if I was to read this correctly, it looks like we're 10 basis points ahead of expenditures by revenues.
Yeah, so if looking at this one right here, yeah, we're at 29%. Yeah, so we're almost.
Great. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Does anyone from the public want to address anything on this item? Seeing none, proceed to item number 3.
So the last item has, we're going to talk about financial policies. It's a follow-up from the February meeting where we initially introduced this topic. And so I do have a presentation, and it has about 20 slides, but mainly I provided that so that you can refer to them, but I'm not necessarily going to talk about every slide because many of those slides were presented at the February meeting. But one special thing is that the slides have been updated to reflect the 2017 CAFR information. So there is some slight, changes, and I thought maybe some of the information may be helpful. Now, I did want to apologize because I think that the printouts that you have, the font was got a little screwy. So we're going to send you a new one so that you have that. But you can still read it. It's just a little screwy. All right. So special font. Not everyone has the special font. So I apologize. So again, why do we have policies and procedures? It sets the directional tone of the organization. It informs our business processes, and it shows that we're a mature organization and that we're able to react to situations, to assess our risk, and to also identify areas where we can make improvements, and then process improvements. So that's part of the reason why we have these policies, and it also informs us on long-term financial and strategic planning. So the governing, or the unified government, has a whole slew of policies. They're all published in our budget document every year. They're in the back of that 400-page document, so you probably haven't read those in a long time, and we appreciate that. The whole effort here is that the policies are, they're really basic policies, and so what we're doing here is actually memorializing a lot of our current practices in the policy so that they're more robust. So what I've provided in this packet, here that was attached for the presentation, is our revised policies. And as I mentioned in the memo, the blue text is basically just affirming what our current practices are. It's not a change necessarily from our current practices. It's just making our current financial policies even better and more informative. So it's a way of communicating to our public that we're really on top of our financial management, and this is how we do it. So the blue is just memorializing or documenting our current practices. And so the red areas are where we're proposing to you for your consideration some possible changes. All right, so this presentation is going to focus on those red areas. Okay, all right. So we have a whole slew of policies, and I've outlined them here. They're on top of it, to start off the top, I have added a new one which is the budgetary and financial policy summary. We're going to call it the short form. And so this is a quick 3-pager that just tells you real quick in all these various areas the overriding direction of our organization and the commission in terms of financial policy. And then it's followed by the operating and capital policy, our revenue and user fee policy, the expenditure policy, our capital asset, how we manage our assets, long-term financial planning, and then there's 3 reserve policies, one for the general fund, one for all those other special revenue and levy funds, and then last one for the enterprise fund. The enterprise fund policy, we don't have that right now, so that's a brand new policy. And then we're going to make a few tiny tweaks to our accounting, auditing, and financial reporting policy and to the debt policy. All right? So just to get started, and so you notice here that these top 3, we make no changes. We're just documenting our current practices. And so as a result, I'm going to jump right to the capital policy. So the only change we're making in our capital policy, which the capital policy is really going to help our staff to give them really clear direction on, how we manage our assets, how we evaluate and assess their, how the assets are providing services, what assets need to be improved before others, and the prioritization of those assets. That policy is going to really set that. We worked real closely with the Public Works Department on writing this policy. The only change that we're making is that, number one, we're asking departments to submit their fleet and their vehicle and information budget requests through the respective divisions that manage those assets before they go forward to the county administrator for his review and discussion. So there's kind of an extra step that's added there before the fleet and the vehicle and information technology. They were just proposed straight up into the CMIP request and brought forward to the CAO without that kind of mid-step where there's an internal review. So that's one thing we're adding. And then, yep. The other item that we're adding is, we're providing a clear definition of what a capital project is. So we talked about this during the CMIP, workshops that we had a couple weeks ago. And, they had all these lists of items that cost less than $50,000. And what we decided is that what we need to do is take that out of there, out of the CMIP, and put that over in the operating side of the budget because the amount is too small. And so that's what we're doing. Also, we're making sure that projects that are being proposed are ones in which they're going to have a useful life of greater than 5 years. So this is a common definition for capital projects, and so that's why it gives clear direction to everybody that that's what we need to do. Now, it doesn't mean that departments can't ask for things below $50,000. It just means that that's part of the operating budget process, not the capital budget process. Any questions on that?
I do. I have one question, and I've written throughout most of the policy revisions that you're recommending here. The CMIP, one of the things I notice in here is you have maintenance down. Would you explain what you mean by maintenance? Because I perceive it as if we're going to invest in a capital investment, build a new building, part of our ongoing budget should be the maintenance portion of what it's going to keep to maintain that building through its life, through its useful life. Or is that different than the maintenance that we're considering in here?
No, that's exactly what that is. And there should be a definition for maintenance in here, and if there isn't, we'll add it, okay? I'm used to in other municipalities having what they call a CIP without the M, right? But our organization has that M in there because it's including various road projects that are done on an annual basis. And so that's the common practice that's been taking place over the past. And, at this point, I just wanted to have really document our current practices and not make a lot of big changes that's why we have that maintenance M in there is my guess, so. Maybe in the future we'll make some realignment in that area. Okay, so now the next one is one that I think a lot of people are interested in, and it's the general fund reserve policy. Now, based on your feedback from the February meeting, I did make just a slight tweak, but I'm still proposing, and the county administrator as well, all of us management are proposing that we increase the general fund reserve from the current 10% of operating expenditures and transfers to what is 2 months, the equivalent of 2 months of operating expenditures and transfers, which equates to roughly 17%. And that be a target. That's one that actually we've already met that target several years ago. But we want to make sure we maintain that level. And then, in addition, we aspire to achieve an additional month in order to cover us for emergencies or economic contingency. And that we aspire to achieve that extra 1 month, which is the equivalent of 8%, over, say, the next 5 years. But it doesn't hold you to it. It's just something, it's an aspirational, policy direction that you hope to achieve. So. And then so the policy also, it varies from the current practice, where the current practice or the current policy does not really specify how the unified government can use the reserves. So for example, we have an operating reserve, but during an economic crisis, the whole point of having a reserve is to cover us when we enter into an unexpected economic crisis, or if there's some disaster, for example. And yet there's no guidance in the current existing policy that talks to, when is it appropriate to tap into that reserve. So that's what that page 35 talks about, is establishing that criteria. And then the next change is direct staff on, once we do dip into the reserve because of those, because we've met those criteria, then what's the plan for replenishing that, so that we bring that reserve back up? And so the plan is that, we review it, that staff presents the information on the fund balance status, and then together we provide you a long-term financial plan, and you review that, and that over the course of future years, you all work towards replenishing that reserve back to that level. So it's not necessarily, it's something that we all just work together to achieve, and that we all, through consensus, and agree that it's a policy direction. So when we're talking about achieving reserves, we're not really talking, or to the levels that we want, we're not talking about appropriating money to a reserve account. It's basically how much money we have in the checking account, and how much falls below after we've brought in money and then spent it, what's left. And so there isn't any kind of, I know there had been a question a little bit about whether the state statutes and the Kansas cash basis law impact this discussion. And in my mind, it doesn't, because the cash basis law really is in reference to the authority to appropriate money, to spend it. Whereas here, we're just talking about funds which fall to the bottom at the end, after the revenues come in and the expense goes out. So. Now, I do have a few slides, so let me walk you through this a little bit. So, why do we always talk about the general fund, right? Well, just to remind you, I went through and tallied up all the expenditures in our 2017 CAFR, which we're going to present to you in a couple of weeks, and you can see here that 51% of all the expenditures, including the sewer fund, everyone, right? Is the general fund. Our total expenditures during 17 were $390 million, and 51% of them are the general fund. 21% were the capital project fund, 3% were the debt service for economic development fund, which is a whole variety of funds combined together, and then 8% were for sewer. So naturally, if there's funding pressure in these other areas, except for sewer, because sewer is an enterprise fund, but if there's funding pressure in these other areas, they're going to look to the general fund for help. And then another reason, of course, I don't have to remind you, we have to report to the S&P and to Moody's, and they often will tell us that if we improved our fund balance, we would increase the likelihood that we would get upgraded. I don't know, it's hard to know, because that's kind of a moving target. We also have a high debt load. So just to give a little caveat, but I did want you to know that that's one of the goals that are expressed by our, that's one of the things that the credit rating agencies often remind us of. So what would happen if we got a rate increase? Because right now we're split, right? We've got S&P at AA. This is what they call a split rating. The S&P at AA, and Moody's, they have us at A1. And that happened in February of 2015. So if we were to bring our Moody's rating up 2 notches to AA, we would probably experience a 50 basis point decrease in our interest rate that we pay on our GO bonds. And so if we did that, our GO bond rating, for example, would decrease from 3.5% to 3. Well, how much does that equate to? Well, if we issued a $15 million bond, over 20 years, we'd save $944,000 in interest. So that's the difference between the two ratings. Now, I'm not saying honestly, I'm not saying that if we increase our reserves to 3 months of operating expenditures that Moody's is going to upgrade us, because Moody's has lately been emphasizing a great deal in municipalities investing a greater portion of their resources towards reducing the pension and OPEB liabilities. And so that is a huge hurdle, very big challenge. So, but just let you know that this is one of the things that they recommend that we do. And of course, you know, this $900,000 in savings that we could incur could be spent on other areas, right out of our budget. So, and then just to give you a little historical context, I've updated this graph that you saw previously. So since we consolidated, this is the fund balance of our general fund. I'm talking the city, county, and the parks general fund combined, right? And so it started at 36%, and then it dropped down to 18% by 2001. Then, which by the way, 2001 there was an economic crisis. So, and then, well, the 9/11 and other things. So, then it ratcheted back up to 34%, stayed up there for a while, and then as the economic crisis most recently that happened in 2009, it started dropping all the way down to 7, right? And then we brought it back up just a tad, and so my guess is Moody's didn't downgrade us at this point because they were hoping that we were going to continue to go back up, but instead we went down again, and that's when they downgraded us. But more recently, it's increased to 17% in 2015, and then it was around 16.5 or so last year, and now with the CAFR that we're going to present, it's at 19%. It's actually 18.5%. Now this is unassigned fund balance, all right? So, and this is on a modified accrual basis. It's not on a cash basis. So when we do the budget, we're talking cash basis. These percentages will look a little different, and we'll take care of that. We'll explain that when we get to that point, all right? So currently, we're at our 2 months of expenditures because we're at 2 percentage points above it. Now, how does this look with our other neighbors? Well, so here's the unified government at this yellow, and here's all our neighbors and where they are. Now, this is as a percentage of revenues, but revenues and expenditures are very similar, so that Moody's actually does their metrics based on revenues, not expenditures, but now, and I should tell you that some of these cities are quite a bit smaller than us. So the percentage that they're holding appears greater in total because their expenditures or their revenues are lower. So just keep that in mind. But Kansas City, Missouri is at 13%. Johnson County is at 25%. Okay. There's the data that matches that chart in case you wanted to refer to it. I'm not going to go over that, just providing that. All right, so now oftentimes you have brought up the question, very good question. You know, a lot of times finance directors will underestimate revenues and then overestimate expenditures in order to stash away cash for to let fall to the balance, right? Well, so over time, I'm just going to show you the trend. So as you can see, this is the revenue chart, the first chart. And the red is how much was budgeted that we thought we were going to collect in revenues since 2008 to current. And then the green bar is how much we actually collected. So you can see, for the most part, we have consistently budgeted. Did I get it turned around? Oh, that's the expenditures. Well, you know, I think I might have messed up on this graph. I'm really sorry. I just now noticing. I think it was picking up the wrong information. Yeah. But I do know the information in this this text box is correct. So apologize for that. So over time, over the last 10 years, I've figured out the average amount on an annual basis of how much more in revenue we collected than what we expected to collect. And that average is about $900,000 a year, all right? Whereas on the expenditure side, we actually budgeted more than we spent by about $3.4 million. So the two combined, the more money collected and less money than we expected spent, equates to a net of addition of $4.3 million that if we hadn't spent it in the subsequent year would fall to fund balance. So that's what we call kind of a natural amount that would fall to reserves if we pass a balanced budget every year. A balanced meaning revenues equals expenditures without hitting fund balance. So that just take a look at that. So, like I said, you adopt a balanced budget, and then you keep your expenditures conservatively low, and then you don't, when you do your budget, you don't dip into fund balance, and that's how you'll get to that reserve, if that's the goal. All right, so as I mentioned, we've already hit our 2-month reserve, so we're already on the path to achieving this emergency reserve amount. And based on these assumptions, this is I estimate that we'll reach that by 2021, if that's your policy direction. Now, you know, I'm providing this information so that you can see that it's achievable. This is just natural, you know, applying the 4.3% natural difference.
I want to make sure I understood that correct. You said 4.3%, but I see 4.3 million, and I think, does that go back to
million? I meant million, sorry.
That goes back to your 4.3 million if your history demonstrates that we don't spend the additional 3 million and take in the additional revenue, and we want to bank that to build our reserve.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. I meant to say million. Yeah. So here's just again, just what we're saying. Minimum recommendation. So GFOA recommends a minimum of 2 months operating expenditures, and so that equates to out of the 17 expenditure level of $198.8 million in the general fund, 2 months equates to $33.1 million. And the amount that we ended up 17 with, which you'll find out in the CAFR here in a few weeks, was 36.8. So we're at 18.5. And then I told you that I did a risk assessment, and based on my own assessment, I figured out that given these risk areas, we're probably should be in the 25 to 31% reserve target area, whereas right now we're up here, right? So as a result, if we were to pursue or in the future an emergency reserve, then that additional month would cost another $16.6 million. So, and so that all goes back to this chart, which is all reflected here. You see how there's 17 million roughly. Now this number grows a little bit because our expenditures grow. So the percentage, relatively speaking, increases. So. And so that's all I have. Just this is a summary of that. And basically, if we, as staff, if we notice that we're falling below the target, then we'd come back and show you that and show a 5-year time horizon and, come up to collaborative with, collaborating with you on a plan for achieving that reserve back to the level, the operating reserve. Any questions? This is the meat of the presentation. Okay. So now, special revenue funds are all those county and city, the county tax levy funds. They're all these other smaller funds that are dependent on dedicated resources, et cetera, right? And the current policy has established reserve percentages for all of those funds. And the only changes we're making is that we are making some modifications to the name of some of those funds so that they match what they're actually called right now. And, because this policy hadn't been revised since 2013, I think. And then also there's a couple of new funds that we added that we didn't have. I think it was Special Asset Fund and maybe a couple others. So that's the only change being made here. So.
Can you give, one of the things I would ask with those new established funds, those reserves, could you share with us the amount, the total dollar value with your percentages that you're proposing? So I have a better understanding of the dollar amount that we're talking about in reference to the budget?
Sure, yeah. And
5% to 10% is a 5-point variance, and 5 basis points, and it could be the difference between 100,000 or 150,000, 200,000. So if you could give me a dollar figure on the ones that you're proposing, the new ones, the ones in red that you have on page 40, I'd like to see what those percentage are, what additional dollars we're putting into reserve.
Yeah, sounds good. Actually, that's funny because we'll do that, no problem. I think that if you refer to the Q1 report that you have with you as well, on that back page, there's a listing of all these funds and their budgets. And so you'll be able to see how much we're talking about here, because this is a percentage of expenditures. So this report that looks like this, the back page has a list of all the funds.
Well, evidently don't have that one. What's in here? I'll find it, Kathleen. We'll visit on that.
Okay, all right.
I may be able to extrapolate the information.
Yeah, and I can tell you real quick, for example, the new fund that we've only added one fund, and it's a special asset fund.
That's what I was saying.
All the other, and then the county clerk technology and the county treasurer technology. So those funds roughly spend between 30 and 50,000 a year. So we're not talking about a lot of money here.
Well, those were new funds, and I just want to ensure that if we're going to be putting reserves aside, that we have a rolling number as to the percentages. We may want to reduce those to 2 percentage basis points, differentiating the 2 versus the 5 percentage points. I mean, sometimes our budget gets quite constrained, and I just want to be prudent in how I look at the reserves and what we may need to do when times get tough.
Yeah.
If we're going to build reserves and we don't need to have them there and it becomes a cash cow for something, then we need to cut back on the reserves. And so I just like to know the dollar value. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And you can see these funds all have, target reserves that are relatively low, between 5 and 15% roughly. 15 is the highest one. So, All right, so the next one has to do with our enterprise fund and our internal service funds. And this is a new policy, but what I've highlighted here are the key differences from our current practices. So right now, we don't have a reserve policy for our enterprise fund, but we, in practice, watch that and have, in fact, through our current practices, implemented sort of the same kind of policies that are articulated. But one of the variations from the current practice that I have outlined in our proposed policy is that when we look at the enterprise fund, because it's an enterprise fund, we're not really looking at fund balance. What we need to do is look at what they call working capital. And working capital is actually defined in the policy, but it's basically, you go over to the balance sheet, so you don't look at the income statement, you're looking at the balance sheet, and you take current assets minus current liabilities. It's basically working capital. And this is a very common way of evaluating the liquidity and of an enterprise fund, all right? So that's what we're presenting, or what we're proposing here. And then we're looking at that working capital and matching it with the percentage that represents of the total expenses of the sewer fund. We're talking really about the sewer fund here, but also the stormwater. The next area is that we're also creating kind of an aspirational target towards reaching a certain level of appropriate funding for our workers' comp and workers' comp and health benefits fund. So right now, the state, which issues our workers' comp permit, has been kind of directing that level, and we want it so that our policy is matching what is the industry standard and what's recommended by GFOA, all right? So we just want that embedded or documented in our policies. And that will help our auditors too, by the way, because they've asked about that too. So again, same criteria for spending, similar to the other reserves. Economic crisis or to invest in capital assets. Enterprise fund's a little different. Same plan for replenishing the reserves once you dip into them, a plan over the future 5 years, and then again how working capital is defined. Now, so generally GFOA recommends for enterprise funds that at a minimum you have 25% reserves. But then if you also have these other risky activities, then they recommend you add additional reserves. So, for example, if there's a lot of seasonality with your enterprise, a lot of times utilities have a lot of seasonality because there's a lot of watering of lawns during the summertime. So the inflow of revenues really varies over the year. I don't know, sewer probably not so much. But how old your assets are and the condition of them really affects how much reserves you ought to have. Whether we incur higher operating costs as a result of harsh winter conditions, and are we saving money for future mandated capital improvements, such from the EPA, for example? And what's the anticipated future debt load? So those are things that you should consider. So what we're recommending is that the enterprise fund have between 40 and 50% of operating expenditures reserved. And we've met that target. Here's a historical view of the working capital of the sewer fund since 2002. And there's the target, and roughly, and we're above that. Okay. So having a reserve helps smooth out the operations and increases your ability to pay for capital with cash rather than debt, and so diminish your interest costs. That's all I got on the enterprise fund. All right, so we're almost there, home stretch. The last item, very minor. What we're going to do, this accounting and auditing and financial reporting policy, we're making very few changes, except that I noticed that in the current policy, there's it says that we're going to provide you our budget to actual report that we just presented to you only 3 times a year, and I'm changing it to 4, right? And Reggie probably wishes I'd left this at 4, but you know. And then the last item is I did want to mention that, so the debt policy, we really want to take a deep dive into our debt policy and review that in more depth. But this year, and we want to work with our financial advisor on that effort, but this year we're just going to make a few very minor tweaks. And that's basically, the policy was written before we got downgraded, and so it refers to that we want to maintain our AA rating. When you know, that's true, but you know, what we actually want to do is upgrade our Moody's from the current lower status that it is now at, right? And then the last thing is, yeah, exactly. See, that's all. So I just some wording changes to that effect, dealing with that issue. So, so that's all. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mine is more of a statement on the last point.
Okay.
Do you want to change the words to achieve and maintain?
Sure, we can do that. Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't have to fix it in the future.
Yeah.
I have a couple comments. I won't be lengthy.
Mr. Walters?
I get it that you are very interested in reserves after seeing 15 or 20 slides about reserves. I'm interested in debt, and we didn't see any slides about debt. And I think we could put a bar chart up there showing how much debt we have compared to all those other cities, and we'd get a disappointing result. We are the most indebted city in Kansas by a long shot, but we're not doing anything about it. And as I read the debt policy, it doesn't say anything. Whereas your revised reserve policy gives us some fairly clear benchmarks and goals. The debt policy, you can't tell whether we want to increase debt or reduce debt. And based on our experiences, we're committed to increasing our debt. Every year we want more debt. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. And I'll just advise all of my fellow commissioners, I will not be voting for any 2019 budget if it increases our debt. There's absolutely no reason in my mind that we should do that. And focusing on putting more money in the bank while we borrow more and more money doesn't seem to make sense to me. I have a lot of other comments. I guess my question now is, how would you like us to express our comments to you between now and when we see this next?
I would greatly value if you would email me your comments. We probably should go through Emmerich and then we'll get back to you. Yeah, at the next meeting or before.
Any other comments? Yes, sir. Kathleen, if I may, I just want to say thank you for the diligence and preparation that went into this information. This was very well formalized. I was able to get through it and made plenty of notes. I would encourage all commission members to read this policy revision and have any suggestions, comments, which we need to do our due diligence to help you with your charge here. Very, very well presented this evening. I sincerely appreciate the preparation that went into educating us about the changes within the policy instead of us trying to read through it and catch up with you. By pulling it out and setting it up the way you did, it's much more absorbable having a discussion. Now, next month's my understanding that we will be either approving the proposed policies, and by by that time, we should have any changes, any suggestions, any comments or concerns to bring them to you through Emmerich. I just want to make sure that I heard that correctly for the commission, and that we either email them to you directly or through Emmerich.
Yes, that would work fine, yeah.
Okay. You have any questions of us?
No, I don't have any questions, no, yeah. You know, as you know, we're gonna have a whole series of budget workshops beginning in July. So, you know, these topics are all very relevant to those discussions.
Again, I want to compliment you on your preparation for the meeting this evening. And if there are any members of the public that would wish to speak on this item, make note we see none. If there's no further questions of the committee, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion been made and seconded. We don't need to call roll. Meetings.